Hi everybody, I'm Sue and I'm a quilter in southeastern Pennsylvania, and my main thing with quilts is scrap quilting and also about being frugal whenever I can in quilting, because quilting can get expensive pretty quickly. So stick around and I'll teach you everything that I know about it, so maybe you can pick up some tips for your journey into quilting also. So the first thing I want to talk about today is uh, if you've watched previous episodes, I will have talked about the 25-cent sales that I go to at one of our local churches. And I get a lot of my men's shirts there, which then I take apart and I put into quilts. But you never know what you're going to find, so you have to look through everything. And so one of the other things that I found the last time I went were these rolls of adding machine tape. They were from Staples. It says adding machine tape, calculator, and cash register tape. So there were 12 rolls in here originally, but this bag had 6 of them in. And what I use these for is you can sew directly onto the paper with any little scraps of fabric that you have. And I would not, of course, use the whole length at once, but I would cut it at about like a half of the width of fabric. So about 22 inches maybe I would cut at once, and then sew it all up with fabric, your smallest bits. And what I mean by that is something like this. Now I did not use the adding machine tape for these. These are wider, as you can see. They're wider than this. But it's the same premise. So I have a basket on my sewing table that whenever I get things that are too small to use for mostly 2.5-inch squares. I have been using some 1.5-inch squares too, but any little tiny strips that I just can't throw away, I throw them in the basket. And then every once in a while I'll get the basket out and I just start sewing things together. And this is an example of what I end up with them. And now this is usable fabric again for me. And I'll show you how I use some of this too. So anyway, this is one of the things I got at the 25-cent sale. So I have 6 rolls of this for $1. That's a pretty good deal. The other thing I got was just this cute little trinket. Now this wasn't a pincushion when I picked it up. This was hollow in here, so I don't know what the original use of this was, but it was just a cute little duck. And as soon as I saw that it had an opening in there, and it's painted inside too, I thought I could make a pin cushion out of that. So I did. So this was just a 5-inch square that I cut into a circle and just did a running stitch through it and gathered it up. And then I stuffed it with really small pieces of leftover batting, the pieces of batting that get trimmed from your quilt when you're done quilting and you need to square everything up before you put your binding on. That is usually waste. I save that too. Another way to be frugal. And I do use those pieces a lot. So this is just one tiny example of where I put my leftover batting in the little duck. And then another thing, this is not from the 25-cent sale, but something that I've been working on recently, is we talked about making binding, I believe in episode 5. You can check out that video. And I had gone to a fabric sale in Ephrata, Pennsylvania. And when I go to fabric sales where you can get things really cheap, I do keep my eye open for 1-yard cuts of fabric so that I can make binding out of it. And I will look for things in primary colors. And as you'll see here, if it's got stripes to it, that makes a beautiful binding. And so what I do with those then is I go ahead and I make the bindings even though I have no quilt in mind at all. I have no idea where this is going to end up. But I keep a box full of bindings that I've made already, and I'm constantly surprised at how many times I finish a quilt and I don't know what binding I want to put on, but I will look in this box and I almost always find something in here that I can use. And I think it helps because I'm a scrappy quilter. So most of my quilts, I really could pick, a variety of different colors. So I think I bought 5 different ones at the sale I just went to. I know these were here. No, not that one. No, I think it was just 5. So these are the 5 that I just recently made. So I think I have to make some blue quilts maybe, or look for ways to use some blue on my quilts, which is no problem for me at all. And so 3 of them have stripes, and then this red one has stripes, and then I have this darker blue one. So now my box of binding is pretty full. That doesn't mean I'm going to be able to use all of these for a quilt that I finish, but this is going to be the first place I look. I still do have to make bindings, especially for a certain quilt, if nothing in here is going to work. And that's fine too. This is just for me, sort of a time saver. When you finish a quilt and you kind of see the finish line and all it needs is binding, you kind of want to get it done. So this works for me. So let's catch up with what I've actually been working on. I've been busy, but for those of you who do hand quilting, it's a process. It takes a while to do some hand quilting. So this is what I've been working on, and I'm just going to give you a sneak peek. I'm not going to show you the whole thing yet. It's a red and white one. So I quilted from the top. This is the bottom, and I'm all the way down to about here. So I'm kind of on the home stretch here. So I'm hoping that the next video you will see a finish on this. I started quilting this on October 22nd, and I quilt every day in the morning for as long as I can. Sometimes it's longer than others. I get distracted easily too, just like everybody else. And I always have other things to work on too. But it's not bad. And so for those of you wondering too how I mark it, you see all these blue scary lines on the top of the quilt? I will show you what I use. So far I have had 100% rate of them all washing out. I have never ever had a mark that was left behind from these markers. And this too, from all of the videos online that I watch and all of the comments that I read too on different people's channels, somebody had suggested these markers. They're called Leonis, Leonis, and they must be from either Japan or China, if you can see the packaging here. And they come in a package of 10. And even though they're smaller and shorter, they still last about as long as the markers that you can buy from, say, Joann Fabrics, that are they're as tall as like a normal pen is. The markers just don't last very long. When you're drawing on fabric, it just kind of sucks all the liquid out of the markers. So I go through 5, 6, maybe 7 markers when I mark a quilt like this. And they're not 100% dried out. So sometimes then I keep them where I do my hand sewing. or my hand quilting, because some of the times I just need like a little bit more of a line drawn, especially on the darker fabrics, just so I can see better. And so I just kind of keep it next to where I sew, and I use them until they're dead. And the other thing, I have some stencils for marking. I don't have a huge quantity of them, but I really like the Baptist fan. This makes your quilting lines 3/4 of an inch apart. And so when you're doing a big quilt, it's a lot of quilting. I have never seen a quilt with a Baptist fan that I don't like. It just always looks good on any kind of quilt that you do. And so sometimes if I'm just not sure how I'm going to quilt something, I'll use this pattern. And sometimes if it's a quilt that I really like and I know I'm going to keep in my collection, I'll use that because I know the quilting lines are going to be nice and close. So this is one thing I've been working on, so stay tuned for another week or so. I'll have it finished and then I'll show you the whole thing, and there's a surprise on the back. So the red and white quilt I did was a sampler, and since I don't have any new finishes to hang up behind me, I got one of my old quilts out. I used to label all my quilts way back in the day. I don't anymore, and I know that's controversial, but I'm not going to do it. But anyway, I did back in the day. So the quilt behind me was a sampler that I did. The label says 1998. So that's an old one. And it has polyester batting in it because that's what I used back then, because I didn't have quilt stores that I knew of in my area. They were not as common as they are now. There were sewing stores that just sold all kinds of fabric, but not necessarily quilting stores, at least not where I live. So anyway, that's the one behind me for today, 1998 with polyester batting. Okay, so this is the next project that I'm actively working on. I almost always have a quilt. I do my hand quilting at my kitchen table. So that's downstairs. This is upstairs. So upstairs I have my sewing room, and then I have this room, which once my kids moved out, I took this over right away. And this is where my design wall is, which is actually the floor. And this is where I based all my quilts too. So it's basically an empty room. So right now, what I have on the floor here that I'm working on is another Orphan block quilt. And I got all of my Orphan blocks out. And the first thing I did was I sorted them into piles based on what size they are. I didn't exactly measure them because when you do Orphan block quilts, that kind of goes out the window really fast. So it was just approximate. And so then I just kind of started laying them out in rows just to get an idea basically of what I have to work with at first. And, you know, some of my thought processes I'll kind of share with you along the way. These blocks here that I'm going to lay down were some that I had on the floor originally, and they did not make the final cut. And my thinking with these is when I had everything laid out here, these were the ones that really popped out at me, that stood out, that to me, I mean, some of them may have, kind of worked a little bit, but I still had other blocks that I thought would be a better fit in here. So these are the blocks that actually got removed from the possibilities of everything that went into this quilt. And like I said, I took a picture with my phone, I look through the screen, and I just kind of see if there's anything that just doesn't look right. Like I think these are all too dark, or that just doesn't have the same feel or vibe or flow of the quilt. And there's certainly no formula, no rules for that. It's just I go with my gut feeling a lot. And so you can kind of see now, let me pick these up again, that I kind of had a feeling of the reds to me seem to tie everything together here. And that doesn't mean I needed every single block to be red or have red in it. There are enough red blocks in here, different kinds of reds, that I thought kind of flowed and made everything more cohesive. And then, so as you can see, there are some blues in here too. There are some bright pops of yellow in here too, some bright greens. But, that's fine. It's an orphan block quilt, so they're not all going to be matchy anyway. So that's just kind of like roughly how I start, by laying everything out in rows. And then to make them all fit together, I add these little spacers here at the top and the bottom. I look in the whole row and I will see which one is the tallest in the whole row. And it doesn't matter what that measurement is. I will then try and make sure every single block is that tall. And every row has its own different size. But as long as I have everything coming out the same in a row, it's going to work. And so I want spacers in between the blocks also, so that the blocks are separate enough from each other so that they're not just running right into each other. And that's just another way to try and make things fit. And for those, I try to use mostly off-white tans, brownish, with little bits of red. This piece here has some red in it. Some little red strips here. That is what we talked about earlier, how I sew bits of fabric, onto like the adding machine papers. So there's an example of that there. And if you look around, there are some other little orphan blocks that I have tucked away here and there, like little 9 patches that I had left over. So that helped to build that block taller. And I had a couple of flying geese here at the bottom too that helped to build that block to be tall enough. And this one is a quilt label. They used to come as a panel and you could cut them apart to put your quilt labels on. So that one's been hanging around for a while. Now it has a home. And same with this one right here. This one was also a quilt label, so that got tucked in there. So that's just some of the things that I think about when I'm trying to build an orphan block quilt. The rows are complete, but now I need to join the rows together, and I want to put in something between some of the rows, like a sashing, and that's where I'm at. I'm kind of stuck with that now. I have to audition some things and see what I want and see what might work for that. It could be a little bit longer. I'm happy with how wide it is. It's approximately 82 inches, and I will put a border on it. I try to shoot for about, I can go up to 88 and be okay with that. but I don't like to go bigger than that because my batting is 90 inches. So that's pretty tight already. So this is how far I got on this. And this is about a week's worth of work. It's actually, you know, when it's all together kind of like this, it kind of looks like, oh, it was easy because the blocks were already made. Well, let me tell you, the one night after I got done working on these, I was exhausted. I was so tired just from the decision processes all the time. Um, just how am I going to fit things together? Where am I going to piece these together? Constantly measuring, constantly straightening things up, because in the end, it needs to lay flat. You need to be able to connect things, join things together, have straight edges, and it has to lay flat. And when you're working with some really old blocks, they don't necessarily want to lay flat. And things, some points do get chopped off. I try and save what I can, but sometimes there's no saving it. They're just going to get chopped off. And I guess that's an individual thing. I'm okay with it because I still feel good about rescuing some of these things that are really old and that somebody has discarded already and had no use for and was never going to use it. So my feeling on that is I'm giving it a new life, and individual blocks I think are a lot easier for people to throw away than say a whole quilt. Once I've put them in a quilt and I've made something big and more tangible out of it, I think it's harder for people to throw that away. So I like to rescue these things and put them in a quilt. It just makes me happy. And the other thing I wanted to mention was I really want to thank everybody for all of their comments that you've been posting on YouTube and on the Instagram page too, which is From Small Things 509. And I do look at some of the pages from time to time. I have to be careful because I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, otherwise I don't get my own work finished. But I'm blown away by the people who can do the cross stitching. Some of the work on there is just amazing. It just blows me away. And the knitting and the crocheting, I think it's pretty common for people who do any kind of textile or fiber work to sort of do more than one craft. Um, so yeah, I mean, the work you guys are doing is just amazing. And so I thought I'd throw out, for the knitters out there, there's a podcaster out there who I knew since she was 5 years old because she was good friends with my daughter. And now she lives in the Pacific Northwest. And the name of her podcast is A Knotty Mess. And she's doing some fantastic work with knitting. She does a lot of test knits too. So many different patterns, so many different styles. She's super productive, and she's really easy to watch. So check her out. So that's it for today. That's what I've been working on in my neck of the woods. So thanks for joining me and watching my quilts in progress in real time. And after I'm done with the Orphan block quilt and I get that one together, I have no idea what I'm going to work on next. I have a lot of things in my room that need addressing as far as like certain bins that are overflowing. But I have no plans. I don't know what I'm going to work on. So everybody out there who's been watching, thank you so much. And thanks for your comments. I really appreciate them. And for anybody who has said that I'm an inspiration to them, that just blows my mind because I'm just one person in my own little sewing room doing my own thing. So thank you again, everybody, very much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys are staying busy in your sewing spaces too. I'll see you next time. Bye.